At my husband's memorial, while people cried for the man they thought they knew, I stood at the front, trying to hold myself together. My husband, Michael Carter, was gone. The man who made everyone laugh, who saved lives as a firefighter, who was my entire world, was now a framed photo surrounded by white lilies. The hall was silent, filled with the scent of flowers and grief. Then, in the back of the room, a woman's voice broke through the quiet. "He promised me you'd understand." Every head turned. I froze. My daughter Sophie, only 16, gripped my hand so tightly I could feel her heartbeat racing through her palm. I looked up, and there she was, a woman dressed in black, standing at the door, holding a small velvet box. My brother Daniel leaned in and whispered, "Do you know her?" I shook my head, unable to speak. The woman didn't move closer. She just stood there, her eyes locked on mine. The entire room seemed to shrink, the whispers spreading like wildfire. Who was she? What did she mean by "you'd understand"? The pastor tried to continue, but no one was listening anymore. The woman slowly started walking down the aisle, each step echoing against the marble floor. My heart pounded in my chest, louder than the murmurs around me. "I'm sorry," she said softly when she reached the front. "I shouldn't have come, but he told me to." She opened the velvet box and held it out to me. Inside was a gold bracelet, the one Michael gave me on our 10th anniversary. My name was engraved on it, but it wasn't mine. Mine was still at home. I felt my throat tighten. "Where did you get this?" I asked. Her voice trembled. "He gave it to me. He said you'd know why." Gasps filled the room. My mother, Helen, stood up, her face pale. "This is not the time or place," she snapped. But the woman didn't leave. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter," she said again. "He wanted me here. He promised me you'd understand when I told you everything." The silence that followed was unbearable. I could feel every eye on me, waiting for my reaction. I wanted to scream, to run, to make sense of what was happening, but all I could do was stare at that woman and that bracelet. Something inside me cracked. For the first time that day, I wasn't mourning my husband's death. I was terrified. I didn't know who he truly was. If you're still here listening to my story, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because this is only the beginning of how I learned the man I loved had a secret life I never saw coming. My name is Emily Carter, and for 18 years, I believed I had the kind of marriage people envied. Michael and I met when I was 20, fresh out of college, full of dreams. He was already a firefighter back then, brave, strong, the kind of man who made everyone feel safe. He had this way of walking into a room and making people laugh, even when they didn't want to. When we got married, it felt like my life was exactly where it should be. We built a home together in a quiet Massachusetts town, surrounded by kind neighbors and good memories. Every photo on our wall told a story of love, laughter, and family. But what the pictures didn't show was how slowly things started to change. Michael began taking extra shifts. He said it was because the station was short-staffed, and I believed him. He'd come home late, smelling of smoke and exhaustion. But when I asked if everything was okay, he always smiled and said, "You don't need to worry about me." I wanted to believe him. I needed to. Because the truth is, I was tired too, juggling my job, raising our daughter, and trying to keep the warmth in our home alive. My mother, Helen, had a sharp sense for people. One night after dinner, she looked at me and said, "Sometimes, the man you build your world around is already living in someone else's." I laughed it off. Michael would never do that. He wasn't that kind of man. Then, the night of the accident came. I still remember the knock on the door, the two officers standing in the rain, their faces solemn. They told me Michael's car had spun out on a wet road. They said he didn't make it. Everything after that became a blur. The funeral arrangements, the news stories calling him a hero, the sympathy cards piling up on our doorstep. Everyone kept saying how lucky I was to have been loved by such a man. I tried to believe it. I wanted to honor his memory, to be strong for Sophie. I even stood at his memorial telling myself that this was just grief, that he was gone. But at least I knew who he was. But when that woman appeared and said those words, "He promised me you'd understand," Everything I thought I knew about my husband started to unravel. I had no idea that by the end of that week, I would be forced to face a truth more painful than his death. The memorial ended in chaos. Guests whispered in corners, avoiding my eyes as if grief had suddenly turned into gossip. The woman in black, Rachel, stood near the exit, waiting, clutching that velvet box as if it was her lifeline. I wanted her to leave, to take her secrets with her, but something inside me needed to know. When everyone else had gone, I walked toward her. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Rachel looked fragile, her hands trembling. "My name is Rachel Moore," she said. "I didn't come here to hurt you, Emily. I came because he asked me to." The way she said his name, he, made my stomach twist. I crossed my arms, trying to steady myself. "You said he made you a promise." "What promise?" She took a deep breath. "Michael told me that if anything ever happened to him, I should find you. He said you deserved the truth." Her words cut deep. The truth? About what? Michael had never hidden anything from me. At least I thought he hadn't. "What kind of truth?" I demanded. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "It's not what you think. Please, can we talk somewhere private?" I hesitated, then gestured toward the small room behind the chapel. The air was heavy with incense, and the sound of rain against the windows filled the silence between us. I sat across from her, my hands clenched. "Start talking." She opened the velvet box again and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "He wrote this before he died," she said. "He asked me to give it to you." My heart thudded in my chest. The paper was old, creased, and smelled faintly of smoke, like the scent that always lingered on Michael's jacket. My fingers shook as I unfolded it. The handwriting was his. There was no denying it. "Emily," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I couldn't keep my promise. To either of you. I need you to hear this before you let anger take over. I didn't betray you the way you might think. I just couldn't find the right way to explain." My eyes burned. The way he wrote those words felt like a confession. My throat tightened as I read further. "You once told me that loving someone means seeing the best in them, even when they're at their worst. I hope you can do that for me now." I folded the letter, unable to read more. My voice cracked. What was he talking about? Who are you to him? Rachel's voice broke as she spoke. "I met Michael 5 years ago. My house caught fire in the middle of the night. He was one of the firefighters who saved us. My husband didn't make it out, but Michael carried my son to safety. After that, he checked on us often, made sure we had everything we needed. I thought it was just kindness. Then over time, we became close." I felt a sharp sting in my chest. "Close? You mean you were having an affair?" She shook her head quickly. "No, Emily, not like that. He cared about me, but it wasn't love in the way you think. He was haunted by something. He said he felt like he'd failed you somehow, that he couldn't tell you everything because it would break your heart." Anger flared in me. "You expect me to believe that? That my husband spent years visiting another woman, and it was nothing?" Rachel didn't back down. "He helped us because of my son, Ethan. He's 7 now. He was badly injured in that fire. His lungs were damaged. Michael paid for his treatments. Every hospital bill, every prescription. He said he didn't want to tell you because you'd insist on helping too, and he didn't want to take any more from you than he already had." I felt dizzy. The room spun. Why would he hide something like that? Rachel looked down at her hands. "Because he thought you'd see it as betrayal. But he couldn't stop. He said helping Ethan was the one thing that made him feel like he was still a good man." Her words struck me harder than I expected. I had spent years watching Michael throw himself into his work, into saving others, and I'd thought it was just dedication. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe he was saving other people because he didn't know how to save us. Still, the hurt wouldn't fade. "You said he made you a promise," I said. "What promise was that?" Rachel's voice softened. "He told me that if something ever happened to him, I should come to you and tell you everything. He said you'd understand, because you were the only person who ever really knew his heart." Tears rolled down my cheeks. I wanted to hate her, but her pain felt too real. My mother burst into the room, furious. "Emily, enough! She has no right to be here." But Rachel stood her ground. "Please," she said quietly. "You may hate me, but Ethan needs help. Michael left something for him, something I can't access without you." I looked at her, torn between anger and confusion. "What are you talking about?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded document. A trust fund. In both your names. He set it up 2 weeks before the accident. I stared at the papers, my heart breaking all over again. Michael had been living a life I never knew about, a secret built not on lies, but on guilt and love, tangled in ways I couldn't understand. Rachel looked at me, tears falling. He wasn't perfect, Emily, but he tried to be good. He believed you'd see that someday. I couldn't answer. I just sat there, holding the letter, realizing that the man I thought I knew had left behind more than a mystery. He had left behind a test to see if love could survive the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. The letter lay on my bedside table, its presence heavy and accusing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's handwriting and heard Rachel's trembling voice repeating his words. He said you'd understand. But understand what? How could I possibly understand a secret that felt like betrayal and devotion all at once? The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the heater. Sophie had fallen asleep hours ago, curled up with one of Michael's old shirts. I envied her innocence, her ability to still believe her father was a hero. I sat in the dark, staring at the letter until the moonlight faded and the sun began to rise. That's when I knew I couldn't let this go unanswered. By morning, I was pacing the living room, coffee gone cold in my hand. My brother Daniel called, checking in after the memorial. "You okay, Em?" he asked. I wanted to lie, but my voice cracked. "No, there's something I need to find out. I think Michael was hiding something from me, something big." "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm going to find out." He offered to come with me, but I refused. This was my burden, my truth to face. I took the letter, grabbed my keys, and drove toward the address Rachel had written on the envelope. It was a small neighborhood outside of town, the kind of place where the lawns were overgrown and mailboxes leaned slightly from years of storms. When I reached the house, I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. I didn't know what I was going to say when I saw her again. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like I could hear it echoing through the car. Finally, I got out. Rachel answered the door almost immediately, as if she'd been expecting me. Her eyes were red, like she hadn't slept either. "Emily," she said softly, "I didn't think you'd come so soon." I took a deep breath. "I need the truth, Rachel. All of it." She nodded and stepped aside, motioning for me to enter. The house was small but warm, filled with photos. On the walls were pictures of a little boy, Ethan, smiling shyly, holding a toy fire truck, his oxygen tube visible in every frame. My chest tightened. I could almost hear Michael's voice saying, "He's a fighter, Em, the kind of kid who makes you believe again." Rachel handed me a cup of tea and sat across from me. "He came here every week," she began quietly. "Sometimes just to check on Ethan, sometimes to fix things around the house. He brought groceries, paid for the hospital bills. He didn't do it because he pitied us. He said it made him feel like he was still doing something good." I held the letter tightly in my hands. "So, he was taking care of your son all this time, and he never told me?" "He wanted to," Rachel said, "but every time he tried, he backed out. He said he didn't want to hurt you. He thought you'd see it as betrayal, not compassion." I felt anger rise in me. He should have trusted me to understand. Instead, he made me look like a fool. Rachel's voice softened. "He didn't see it that way. He said you were the best person he'd ever known. That's why he believed you'd understand someday." I didn't know what to feel anymore. Part of me wanted to scream, part of me wanted to cry, and another part wanted to walk out and never look back. But there was one thing left I needed to know. "You said he left something for your son. A trust fund?" Rachel nodded and pulled a folder from the table. "Here, it's in both our names. He set it up 2 weeks before the accident. He said it was to make sure Ethan would always have care, even if something happened to him." I flipped through the paper, my hands trembling. There was Michael's signature, bold, familiar, final, along with a handwritten note attached to the folder. "If Emily ever sees this, tell her it wasn't about choosing one family over another. It was about keeping a promise I couldn't break." Tears blurred my vision. He hadn't been living a double life out of selfishness. He had been carrying a burden too heavy to share. Rachel stood and opened a drawer. "There's something else you should see," she said. She pulled out an old photo. It was Michael holding Ethan in a hospital room, smiling softly, the boy's small hand gripping his finger. He loved this child, Rachel whispered, not because he was mine, but because he reminded him of you and Sophie, of the life he wanted to protect. I sank into the chair, overwhelmed. For the first time since the memorial, I stopped seeing Rachel as the enemy. I saw her as a woman who had also been holding on to pain, to guilt, to gratitude. Finally, I looked up at her. He made me feel like I didn't know him at all, but maybe I didn't see the parts of him that mattered most. Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. He said you'd understand that too. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't ready to forgive him yet, but I knew I had to follow this through. I couldn't let Michael's story end here, buried under misunderstanding. When I stood to leave, Rachel handed me a small envelope. He left one more letter, she said quietly. For you. He told me to give it to you only if you came here on your own. I stared at it, my pulse racing. What's in it? She shook her head. I don't know. He sealed it himself. I held it close, feeling its weight like a heartbeat. Whatever was inside would change everything again. I could feel it. As I walked back to my car, the sky had turned gray, and a cold drizzle began to fall. I slid the envelope into my bag and whispered to myself, "Okay, Michael, this time, I'll understand." I didn't know then that what waited inside that letter would not only explain his secret, but reveal the kind of love that outlives even the truth. The rain had turned into a storm by the time I reached home. The sky was heavy, the kind of gray that made everything feel quieter, smaller. I sat in my car for a long time, holding that final envelope in my hand. It felt like a living thing, full of weight, memory, and questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Inside was the voice of a man I loved and resented all at once. When I finally opened it, the paper trembled as if it had been waiting for me too. The letter was shorter than I expected, written in Michael's familiar, steady handwriting. Emily, if you're reading this, it means Rachel kept her promise. I didn't want you to learn about Ethan this way, but I was running out of time to make things right. I tried to protect everyone, and in doing so, I failed you most of all. I met Rachel during a rescue, the fire that took her husband. I carried her son out of the flames. He couldn't breathe. I promised her I'd help him recover. I told her I'd make sure he lived a normal life, but I also promised you that I'd always be honest. And I broke that promise because I didn't want to hurt you with a truth I didn't understand myself. Please know this wasn't about love or betrayal. It was about guilt. When I lost those people in the fire that night, something in me cracked. I couldn't save everyone, but I could save Ethan. I wanted to feel worthy of you again. I wanted to feel like the man you once believed I was. I stopped reading for a moment, pressing the letter to my chest. Every word hurt. I could picture him writing it, probably late at night, in his old armchair, thinking of how to explain something that defied explanation. I kept reading. Ethan reminded me of Sophie, the same eyes, the same stubborn smile. Every time I saw him fight to breathe, I thought of what it would do to you if it were our daughter, so I paid for his treatments. I visited him. I fixed things around their home. I tried to keep it separate from you, but I see now that love doesn't stay in neat boxes. It spills. It blurs lines. If you ever meet Ethan, tell him I was proud of him. Tell Sophie that her father never stopped loving her. And tell Rachel that I never meant for her kindness to turn into pain. But most of all, Emily, I need you to understand that every time I helped them, I was trying to make peace with myself. For leaving you alone too often, for the nights I came home and couldn't look you in the eye. I was ashamed, not of what I did, but of how I hid it. You once told me that secrets destroy people. You were right. I just never thought I'd become the man who proved it. If you can, forgive me. Not for my sake, but for yours. Because you deserve to live without the shadow of what I couldn't say. I love you, always. By the time I finished reading, the tears wouldn't stop. The paper was wet, the ink slightly smudged under my fingertips. For years, I had thought Michael's distance meant his love was fading, but now I saw the truth. It wasn't distance. It was burden. He had carried a guilt I never knew existed, and in his effort to protect me from it, he built a wall between us. The next day, I called Rachel. She sounded surprised to hear from me. "Emily, I need to see Ethan," I said quietly. She hesitated, then agreed. "He has a doctor's appointment this afternoon. You can come?" When I arrived at the hospital, my heart pounded in my chest. Through the window, I saw a small boy sitting on the bed, a thin oxygen tube across his face, holding a toy fire truck. His eyes lit up when Rachel pointed to me. "Ethan," she said gently, "this is Mrs. Carter. She was a friend of Michael's." The boy smiled shyly. "He talked about you," he said in a soft, raspy voice. I sat beside him, trying to hold myself together. "He did?" Ethan nodded. "He said you were brave, that you kept him strong." My throat tightened. I reached into my bag and pulled out the gold bracelet Michael had given me, the same one Rachel had returned. "He gave me this," I said. "Did he ever tell you what it meant?" Ethan shook his head. "It means," I said slowly, "that love doesn't disappear, even when people do." The boy's smile grew faint but pure. "He said you'd understand." Those words hit me harder than anything else. He said you'd understand. The same words that once sounded like betrayal now felt like forgiveness. Rachel stepped closer, her eyes full of tears. "He was so worried you'd hate him," she whispered. "He never wanted to lie to you. He just didn't know how to explain that what he did came from love, not deceit." I looked at her, and for the first time, saw the woman behind the pain. Not a mistress, not a threat, just another person, carrying part of Michael's heart. "Rachel," I said, my voice steady but gentle. "He loved you, but not the way people think. He loved what helping you gave him, a reason to keep believing he could still be good." She nodded silently, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ethan leaned forward and hugged me. "Thank you," he whispered. In that small moment, something inside me finally broke open and healed at the same time. Michael's secret hadn't been about betrayal. It was about redemption, about a man who couldn't forgive himself until he tried to save one more life. As I left the hospital, the sky had cleared. The storm had passed. I looked up, whispering, "You kept your promise, Michael. I understand now." For the first time since his death, I felt peace. Not the kind that erases pain, but the kind that allows it to exist without destroying everything it touches. A week passed after I visited Ethan, but his words lingered in my mind like an echo that refused to fade. "He said you'd understand." I thought I had already understood when I read Michael's letter, but meeting Ethan changed something deeper in me. It wasn't just about forgiveness anymore. It was about acceptance. For the first time, I began to see the man my husband truly was, not the version I had built in my mind. He wasn't a perfect hero or a deceitful stranger. He was a human being, flawed, frightened, and trying to make peace with his own mistakes. The house felt different now. The air didn't carry the same heaviness it once did. I found myself walking through our home with new eyes, seeing reminders of him not as wounds, but as memories of love that once filled every corner. His jacket still hung by the door, the faint smell of smoke clinging to it, and instead of breaking down, I smiled. That smell had followed me through our entire marriage. It was part of who he was, a protector, even when he didn't know how to protect himself. Sophie started asking more questions about her father. At first, I didn't know what to tell her. How do you explain that the man she saw as a hero had lived a life full of secrets, but not out of betrayal, out of compassion? One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she asked, "Mom, was Dad really happy?" I thought for a long moment before answering. I think he was trying to be. He carried a lot inside, things he didn't know how to say. But yes, he loved us. That love was real, even when it got complicated. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I miss him." "So do I said softly. "But maybe the best way to honor him is to keep doing what he did, helping people when they need it most." A few days later, I visited the cemetery. It was a clear, calm morning. The grass was damp with dew, and a soft breeze moved through the trees. Michael's grave was covered with fresh flowers from neighbors and friends. I knelt down and traced my fingers over his name, carved in the stone. Michael Carter, beloved husband, father, and friend. I placed the gold bracelet on top of the headstone, the one that had passed through 2 women's hands and told an entire story of love, guilt, and redemption. I took a deep breath and whispered, "You didn't have to be perfect to be loved. I forgive you For a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day he died. A quiet warmth in my chest, as if he was there listening. Maybe he always had been. When I stood up to leave, I saw Rachel and Ethan approaching from a distance. She smiled faintly and handed Ethan a small bouquet of wildflowers. He walked up to the grave and placed them beside the bracelet. "Mom says flowers mean new beginnings," he said, looking up at me. "They do," I replied. "And I think your mom's right." Rachel stepped closer, her eyes full of unspoken gratitude. "I didn't think you'd want to see us again," she said quietly. I shook my head. "Michael brought us together for a reason. We don't need to carry his pain anymore. Maybe we can carry his kindness instead." We stood there for a long moment. 3 people connected not by blood, but by one man's choices and the love that somehow survived them. It was strange how something so painful could create something so pure. Over the next few months, Rachel and I stayed in touch. Sophie and Ethan even became friends, bonded by stories about Michael, each of them holding a different version of him, yet both true. Through them, I realized that love isn't limited to one story or one family. It expands, it bends, and sometimes it heals in unexpected ways. One night, I found myself sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching the rain fall softly outside. For years, rain had felt like sadness to me. Now it felt like renewal. I thought of Michael's words. Love doesn't stay in neat boxes. It spills. It blurs lines. He was right. Love had spilled far beyond the boundaries I once understood. In a way, Rachel and I had both lost him, but in another, we had both found parts of him he left behind. The strength to keep going, the courage to forgive, and the understanding that loving someone doesn't mean they'll never hurt you. It means you choose to see the whole of them, the light and the shadow, and still love what remains. Before going to bed that night, I wrote a letter of my own and placed it beside Michael's old photograph. It said, "You were never just my husband. You were a lesson." And I finally learned it. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter, as if the grief that had followed me for months had finally loosened its grip. I wasn't the same woman who stood at that memorial, trembling with confusion and anger. I was stronger now, not because I forgot what happened, but because I had faced it and chosen peace. As I looked out the window, the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon. It was quiet, beautiful, and full of life, just like the man I'd loved. And for the first time, I whispered, not goodbye, but thank you. Because sometimes, love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes shape. It teaches you to forgive, to heal, and to understand. If you felt connected to this story, make sure to subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything, and your stories matter too, because every heartbreak, every secret, and every forgiveness has something to teach us about what it truly means to love.